It's hard to pinpoint exactly when the distance crept into my marriage with Emily. Maybe it was during one of those quiet evenings when I was glued to my laptop editing client photos while Emily watched a movie alone. Or perhaps it was the slow transformation of shared dreams into quiet routines. Everyday life, quietly burying the ambitions we once held so fiercely. We were once filled with visions of art, travel, and spontaneous late-night conversations. But now, the spark felt dimmed, caught in the undertow of work and endless schedules. Emily and I met young, two art students at a small liberal arts college, both drawn to photography and literature. She was brilliant, radiant even, with a sense of adventure that rivaled mine. Over coffee-stained mornings and spirited gallery visits, we built our bond, a shared life that seemed like it could withstand anything. But over the years, as the freelance gigs grew and weekends were spent catching up on client edits instead of exploring new places, we drifted. Her love for literature and my dedication to photography were once connecting threads, but lately they felt like parallel tracks leading us further apart. Then came the invitation. One evening, after another quiet dinner, Emily placed a handwritten envelope on the table with a hint of excitement. The thick, ivory-colored paper was addressed to both of us, our names written in the looping script of my cousin Alex. Alex had always been a bit of a prodigy in the photography world, someone who'd managed to carve a name for himself in the contemporary art scene. It was easy to feel both pride and envy for his success. While I'd been busy with family portraits and wedding shoots, Alex had pursued art unapologetically, becoming known for his intense, almost haunting portrayals of raw human emotion. The invitation was for a private showing of his latest work, a gallery event with some of the city's best-known art patrons in attendance. Alex had scrawled a note at the bottom, insisting we both attend. "It wouldn't be the same without you and Emily," he'd written. "Trust me on this." I glanced at Emily. She was already reading the invite over and over, a quiet glow lighting her expression, a spark of the woman I'd fallen in love with. She looked at me, her eyes brighter than I'd seen in months. "We should go," she said, her voice filled with an eagerness I hadn't heard in years. Her excitement was contagious, and I felt myself nodding before I could think twice. It felt strange, but hopeful. Maybe this event was exactly what we needed to break the monotony, a reminder of the creative passion that had initially brought us together. On the night of the gallery show, we dressed up, a rarity in itself. Emily chose a soft blue dress, one she hadn't worn in years. The way she moved, there was an elegance I hadn't noticed in a long time. She looked beautiful, and I felt a pang of nostalgia for the early days of our relationship, those endless dates and artistic debates that had once defined us. When we arrived at the gallery, the space was bustling with chatter, laughter, and that hum of excitement only artists and their admirers bring to an evening. Alex greeted us at the door, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by something more intense, almost nervous. He hugged us both tightly, thanking us for coming, and led us through the crowded room. The walls were lined with his latest series, a breathtaking collection titled Unmasked. It was raw, a striking combination of vulnerability and intimacy that seemed to whisper secrets to each person who passed by. The photos were a departure from his earlier works, but they were undeniably Alex. Each shot had a distinct presence, moments of stillness captured with remarkable intensity, and I found myself feeling an odd mixture of admiration and jealousy. There was a courage in his work that I hadn't dared embrace in years. Emily was transfixed, her gaze never leaving the photographs. I caught her mouthing words under her breath, almost like she was connecting with the images on some level I couldn't reach. It stirred something within me, a longing for that same connection with her. But as the evening wore on, I felt myself standing more on the periphery, observing from afar. Then, as if reading my thoughts, Alex appeared beside us. He didn't waste time with small talk, instead turning directly to Emily. "Emily, I have a proposal for you," he said, his voice low but intense. "I'm starting a new project, a continuation of this series, and I need someone with the right presence, someone who can bring out the truth in each shot. I'd like you to be a part of it." The offer stunned us both. I looked at Emily, half expecting her to laugh it off, but instead, her face softened and something in her gaze shifted. She was intrigued, hesitant, yet undeniably drawn in. It was like watching someone consider stepping into a world they'd always admired but never quite believed they belonged in. "Oh, I don't know," she stammered, her eyes darting to mine for a moment. "It's been so long since I've even thought of modeling, and I'm not really—" "Perfect," Alex interrupted, his tone unwavering. "You're perfect for this, Emily. It's not about modeling. It's about presence, honesty. I know you'd bring something unique, something I couldn't capture with anyone else." For a moment, I wanted to protest, to pull her away from this sudden allure of his artistic world. But I stayed quiet, watching as she nodded slowly, her eyes meeting Alex's with a look of curiosity and excitement. It was a side of her I hadn't seen in a long time, and I didn't know if I should be worried or simply let her rediscover herself. As we left the gallery that night, she walked ahead of me, lost in thought. A strange mixture of fear and hope settled over me. Maybe this was a path back to each other, or maybe it was something entirely different, a journey that would change everything. Either way, I knew our lives were about to shift in ways we couldn't yet imagine. The next few days after Alex's invitation left a charged silence hanging between us. Emily was distant, lost in thoughts I couldn't reach, her attention drifting during our usual routines. The woman who once shared every fleeting idea with me was suddenly wrapped in a quiet world of her own, leaving me to wonder if I'd just witnessed a glimpse of the old Emily coming back or the beginning of someone new. I could see her curiosity about Alex's project bubbling up, but each time I tried to ask about it, she brushed it off or changed the topic. It was as if she was guarding this piece of herself, unwilling or unable to share it. And so, I found myself on the outside, watching her light up over something I wasn't part of, unsure how to navigate the ache growing inside me. The day of her first meeting with Alex arrived sooner than I expected. She was up early, a rare burst of energy, pulling her out of bed before the sun had even broken the horizon. I woke up to find her in front of the mirror, carefully fixing her hair. It was a sight that brought back a flood of memories. The Emily I knew before the years had softened her ambition, the one who used to take spontaneous photo trips with me just to capture the morning light. But today, her energy felt pointed elsewhere. She noticed me watching her in the mirror and offered a small smile. "It's strange, but I feel excited. Nervous, too," she said, smoothing the creases in her shirt. "It's been so long since I did anything like this." "I'm glad," I replied, forcing a smile, but she was already somewhere else, her thoughts focused on the day ahead. As she left, I lingered in the doorway, feeling an emptiness in the space she left behind. Hours passed, and I went through my usual routine, but a strange urge kept drawing me back to that gallery. I told myself it was just to see Alex, to drop in casually and check in on the work. But there was something more, the worry gnawing at me, the feeling that this wasn't just another project for Emily, but something deeper, a connection I didn't fully understand yet. When I finally stepped into Alex's gallery later that afternoon, I felt like an intruder. The space was empty, the quiet hum of air conditioning filling the silence as I wandered down the hallways lined with his past works. I followed the faint sound of voices, my curiosity leading me until I found them. Alex's studio was bathed in soft, diffused light, casting shadows that danced across the walls. Emily sat on a low stool, her expression soft, eyes following Alex as he adjusted his camera. I hung back, watching them from the hallway, a hidden observer in the shadows. It was the way he looked at her that threw me off. His gaze wasn't just professional. It was intense, almost reverent, like she was his muse. He moved around her carefully, studying her expression, capturing the moments when her guard slipped, leaving her raw and unguarded in a way I hadn't seen in years. It felt as if they were speaking a language I didn't understand, one I wasn't invited to learn. After a moment, Alex caught sight of me. He grinned, raising a hand in greeting. Emily turned, her expression shifting slightly when she saw me, a flicker of something unreadable crossing her face. Come in, Alex said, waving me over. "You'll appreciate this. Emily's a natural. It's like she was born for this." He sounded almost breathless, and there was no mistaking the pride in his voice. The way he talked about her, as if he'd unearthed some hidden part of her, left me feeling off balance. I walked into the room, forcing a casual smile. "Looks like you've got her fully committed." "Absolutely," he replied, giving her a wink. "Emily has this ability to just be present. Most people try too hard, but she lets the moment take her. It's rare." He turned his attention back to her, as if my presence had already faded into the background. Emily met my eyes with a small smile, but there was something distant in it, as if the spark she'd rediscovered was still somewhere beyond my reach. I stood there, feeling like a stranger in a moment that should have felt familiar, but Alex's energy filled the room, leaving me on the sidelines, watching from a distance. The session went on for another hour, during which I found myself observing in silence, noticing how Emily moved, how she softened under Alex's direction. Each shutter click felt like it was pulling her further into his world and away from mine. When the session finally wrapped up, she looked rejuvenated, a kind of radiance I hadn't seen in years lighting up her face. As we gathered our things, Alex pulled me aside. "Listen, I want you to know how much this project means to me. I can't thank you enough for letting her be part of it." "Letting her?" His words hit me in a way I hadn't expected. This wasn't something I had a say in. Emily had chosen this on her own. I forced a smile. "I'm glad she's enjoying it," I replied, masking the unease churning in my stomach. Outside, as we walked to the car, I tried to bridge the gap, to reach for the connection we once had. "You seemed really in your element back there," I said, hoping to spark a conversation. Emily smiled, her gaze softening. It felt good, being seen in a different way, like I was part of something meaningful again. I didn't know how to respond, so I nodded, letting her words hang between us. The drive home was filled with silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts, but the space between us felt wider than ever. That night, as we lay in bed, I reached for her, but she was already drifting into sleep, her breathing soft and even. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the weight of the day pressing down on me. Something had shifted, a crack had formed, and I wasn't sure if it was just the beginning or if it had always been there, waiting for this moment to reveal itself. The next morning, Emily seemed lighter, more at ease than I'd seen in a long time. Over coffee, she shared a few details from her session with Alex, recounting moments with a soft glow in her eyes. I tried to let the warmth of her newfound excitement melt away my unease, hoping that this would rekindle something between us. But even as I listened, I felt a quiet twinge of discomfort, an instinct warning me there was more to this than just art. A few days later, Emily was set for another session with Alex. This time, as she prepared, I noticed a hint of nerves in her movements. She was more focused, studying herself in the mirror, adjusting her appearance with a meticulous care that I hadn't seen in years. I watched her from the doorway, feeling that old ache of jealousy begin to creep in, even as I tried to ignore it. "Are you nervous?" I asked, hoping to bridge the distance between us. She turned to me, her expression thoughtful. "A little. I guess I just want to do a good job. Alex has such high expectations, you know." I nodded, forcing a smile. "He does. But you're doing great." Her smile softened, and for a moment, the old warmth between us returned. But as she gathered her things and walked out the door, I was left alone, feeling a sense of foreboding. That afternoon, I couldn't resist the pull to see her again, to be part of the world that was drawing her further away from me. I made my way to Alex's studio, lingering near the entrance, pretending I was just passing by. I knew it wasn't true. I was there because I needed to see her, to understand this part of her life that felt increasingly out of my reach. The door was slightly ajar, and I peered inside, watching them through the gap. Emily sat on a stool, her face angled toward the light, while Alex circled her, camera poised. The session was quiet, the air thick with focus as he gave her subtle directions, his voice low and intent. He would adjust her hand, gently tilt her chin, his hands lingering longer than necessary. It struck me then, the way he was looking at her. Not as an artist simply admiring his subject, but with a kind of admiration that went beyond the lens. His eyes lingered on her face, on the curve of her lips and the softness in her gaze. Emily seemed to respond in kind, her face brightening under his attention, her expression shifting from uncertainty to something that looked very much like contentment. It was like she was shedding the weight of our life together, embracing a side of herself I hadn't seen in years. They shared a look, one that spoke of something unspoken. My stomach churned as I watched, torn between understanding that this was part of the creative process and feeling that it was crossing a line I hadn't known was there. Finally, Alex noticed me in the doorway. He waved, motioning for me to join them. Caught, I forced myself to walk inside, masking my discomfort. Emily gave me a warm smile, but there was something else in her expression, an unfamiliar light, a sense of self-possession that felt both reassuring and disorienting. Good to see you again, Alex said, his tone casual, as if I hadn't just witnessed an exchange between them that left me uneasy. Emily's been incredible. She has this gift of just letting go. It's refreshing. I nodded, trying to ignore the prickling sensation in my gut. She looks amazing, I replied, my voice thick with something I couldn't name. Alex gestured to a series of test shots he'd taken that day, and I moved closer to the computer to view them. Emily appeared in each photo with a raw, unfiltered vulnerability I hadn't seen in years. She looked different, both more fragile and stronger than I'd ever known her to be. In one photo, her expression was open, eyes focused directly on the lens, capturing a side of her I felt I hadn't known existed. As I scrolled through the images, I felt Alex's gaze on me. You must be proud, he said, his voice low, almost too familiar. I am, I replied, a mix of pride and jealousy tightening my throat. She's beautiful. Emily glanced over, giving me a soft smile, but I couldn't ignore the way Alex looked at her, a gaze filled with something intense, bordering on intimate. I wanted to believe that it was just his passion for the project, but the unease that had begun growing in me since that first session was impossible to shake. Over the next few weeks, Emily's sessions with Alex became a regular part of our lives. She'd come home from the studio with a light in her eyes, describing the day's work with a passion I hadn't heard from her in years. She was transforming before my eyes, shedding layers of self-doubt and hesitation, stepping into a world where she was seen, admired. But the more she shared, the more I felt like an outsider, listening to her describe something I could never fully understand. I wanted to be happy for her. I wanted this newfound spark to bridge the growing distance between us. But instead, I felt it widening, stretching the intimacy we'd once shared into something fragile, something dangerously close to breaking. One evening, Emily came home from another session, her cheeks flushed, her smile bright. She recounted the shoot, describing a moment where Alex had captured her looking away from the camera, lost in thought. He said I looked mysterious, she said with a small laugh, her eyes sparkling. It's strange. He sees parts of me I'd forgotten were there. I swallowed, trying to keep my voice steady. Maybe it's time I take some photos of you too. We could plan a trip somewhere, just the two of us. Like we used to. Emily's smile faded slightly, and she looked away, a strange expression crossing her face. That would be nice, but I don't think it would be the same. Alex, he has this way of pulling things out of me. It's different. Her words, meant as a compliment to Alex, sliced through me. I managed to nod, but my mind was racing. Every attempt I'd made to connect with her was slipping through my fingers, dismissed with a quiet kind of indifference that hurt more than anger ever could. The Emily who was once my partner in everything now seemed like a stranger, her heart and mind caught up in something I couldn't touch. That night, as I lay next to her, I found myself staring at the ceiling, wondering when I had lost her. The weight of it pressed down on me, my mind caught between the love I still felt and the fear that she was slipping away, drawn toward a world I couldn't reach. I couldn't shake the feeling that Alex had seen something in her that I hadn't, a depth I hadn't even known to look for. And in that darkness, I began to wonder if I was witnessing not just a project, but the slow unraveling of my marriage, each click of Alex's camera pulling Emily further from me, frame by frame. The weeks passed, and I watched as Emily drifted further, her late nights at the studio becoming the norm. Each evening, she'd come home a little more removed, more guarded. I tried to shake the feeling that something was wrong, that I was slowly losing her to this world she shared with Alex. She was wrapped in an excitement that felt oddly exclusionary, a side of her that was blossoming, but not meant for me. Our conversations became clipped, full of silences we'd never had before. I'd ask her about her day, about Alex's latest ideas for the project, and her responses were short, as if she was sharing only the bare minimum. The once warm comfort of our home had grown cold, with Emily walking past me, her mind lingering somewhere else. One night, I finally worked up the courage to talk to her, to ask her what had been gnawing at me for weeks. I waited until we were both home, and after a silent dinner, I found her in the living room, flipping through her phone with that all-too-familiar look of preoccupation. "Emily," I began, my voice quieter than I intended. "Is everything okay? You've seemed distant lately." She looked up, surprised, as if I'd interrupted something sacred. "What do you mean?" she asked, her tone cautious. "It's just you're always at the studio or out with Alex, and when you're home, you're somewhere else." I paused, gathering the courage to voice my deeper concern. "Are you sure this is just about the project?" Emily sighed, setting her phone down and folding her hands in her lap. "Why do you always assume something's wrong?" she asked, her tone defensive. "I told you this is something important to me. Alex is helping me reconnect with a side of myself I'd forgotten. Can't you be happy for me?" I swallowed hard, searching for the right words. "Of course I am," I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. "But it feels like you're shutting me out, like you're not sharing this part of yourself with me." She shook her head, a hint of frustration in her gaze. "This is something for me, something I need on my own. I don't know why you feel so threatened by it." "Threatened?" The word stung, piercing through my attempt at calm. "It's not about being threatened, Emily. I just want to be part of this part of your life, the way I used to be." Her eyes softened for a moment, but the hardness returned quickly, her defenses rising. "You are a part of my life," she insisted, though her tone held little conviction. "But this project, this is different. I need you to trust me." Her words hung in the air, and I wanted to believe them, to take her at face value. But her expression told a different story. She looked at me like I was a complication, an obstacle, rather than her partner. And with that look, something shifted between us, an unspoken understanding that we were standing on opposite sides of something fragile and unresolved. The late nights and growing distance continued, each day building on the last, until our relationship felt like a shadow of what it once was. Emily began spending more nights at the studio, claiming that the creative process was demanding, that she and Alex were working tirelessly on his vision for the project. I wanted to trust her, to believe that this was just a temporary phase. But each time she left, a hollow ache settled in my chest. One evening, I noticed her phone buzzing on the counter. She'd left it in her rush to meet Alex at the studio, and instinctively, I reached for it, the temptation overwhelming. The screen lit up with a message from Alex, and though I knew it was wrong, my fingers moved before I could stop myself. "Alex, tonight's shoot will be more intimate. Can't wait to see you there." The words hit me like a punch, a wave of nausea rolling through me. "Intimate." I closed the message quickly, my hands shaking as I set the phone down. For a moment, I just stood there, my mind racing, a million thoughts colliding. What did he mean by intimate? Was it an innocent choice of words? Or was there something more? Something I had been too blind or too trusting to see? I paced the kitchen, the weight of my suspicions growing heavier with each step. I wanted to confront her, to demand an explanation, but a part of me feared the answer, afraid of what I might learn if I looked too closely. Instead, I poured myself a drink, hoping it would quiet the storm brewing inside me. But the feeling lingered, a dark cloud casting shadows over everything I thought I knew. The next few days were strained, a cold formality replacing the warmth we once shared. I could sense her pulling further away, each unanswered question building the chasm between us. I tried to distract myself with work, with projects around the house, but the thought of her with Alex, of the word intimate, gnawed at me, hollowing out every moment of normalcy. Finally, the pressure became too much. One night, as she prepared to leave for another session, I blocked her path, my expression hard. Do you have to go tonight? I asked, trying to keep my tone calm. We haven't had a night together in weeks. Can't this wait? She looked at me, her eyes a mix of irritation and exhaustion. I've told you this is important to me. Why are you making this so difficult? Because I miss you, Emily, I replied, the frustration breaking through. It's like you're not here anymore, like you're living in some other world. I just want you back. Emily's expression softened, a flicker of guilt in her gaze, but she held firm. I'm not gone, she said quietly. This is something I need to do. For myself. I nodded, the sadness settling in, realizing that no matter how much I fought it, I was losing her to something, or someone, I couldn't control. She kissed me on the cheek, a hollow gesture that only deepened the ache, and left without looking back. That night, I lay in bed, unable to sleep, my mind replaying every moment, every conversation, every look she'd shared with Alex. I knew I couldn't go on like this, trapped in a prison of my own suspicions. I needed answers, something to finally put my mind to rest or confirm the fears that had been tearing me apart. I reached for my phone, scrolling through her messages, her call logs, anything that might tell me what was happening. But each piece of evidence only deepened my despair, showing me a side of her life that I was no longer a part of. In the darkness, a decision formed, one that felt both desperate and inevitable. I would go to the studio, unannounced, and see for myself. It was a risk, one that could shatter whatever remained between us, but I had to know. The next evening, Emily sat across from me, quiet, contemplative. After days of distance and half-hearted conversations, she finally met my eyes with a guarded expression, as if preparing for a confession. Alex wants to try something new for the project, she said, her tone hesitant. He thinks it could be the piece that pulls the whole series together. I felt my pulse quicken, sensing something was coming. What is it? I asked, forcing calm into my voice. He asked if I'd be comfortable posing nude, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes dropped to the table, unable to meet my gaze. He says it's to capture vulnerability, a deeper kind of intimacy. He thinks it would add something raw and truthful to the project. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. I struggled to process what she'd just said, 100 emotions rising to the surface. Anger, confusion, hurt. She was talking about revealing herself in a way that was supposed to be for us, for our marriage, not for someone else's artistic vision. But beyond that was the question clawing at me. Why did she feel the need to expose herself like this to him? How do you feel about it? I asked, my voice quiet, though I could barely control the bitterness. She hesitated, her eyes searching mine. Honestly, I don't know. I want to say yes because I trust him and I trust his vision. But part of me feels uncomfortable. She paused, choosing her words carefully. But it's just art, isn't it? You know, Alex. You know he's not like that. I couldn't keep the resentment from my voice. But why does it have to be you? Why not another model? Someone he doesn't have this connection with. Her face softened, and she reached out to take my hand, though I didn't move to take hers in return. It's not about anyone else. He asked me because he thinks I can bring something unique to the project. He thinks I'll give it a kind of honesty. That's why he chose me. The words only deepened the ache in my chest. Honesty. She spoke about bearing her soul for him as if it were a higher calling, something beyond the bounds of our marriage. And yet, there she was, preparing to share that part of herself with Alex while I was left in the shadows, reduced to a bystander in her new world. I forced myself to keep my voice steady. So, you're going to do it? Emily took a deep breath, her gaze resolute. Yes, I think I am. It's something I need to explore for myself. I can't explain it, but it feels important. I pulled my hand away, the hurt tightening in my chest. And you think I'm supposed to just be okay with this? With you naked with him? Emily's face tightened, and she looked away. I thought you'd understand. I thought you, of all people, would support me. I didn't want this to be something that would push us apart. Support you? I replied, the anger breaking through. I've tried to support you through every late night, every missed moment together. But this is not about supporting you. This is about trust, and you're asking me to be okay with something that feels like a betrayal. She flinched, and for a moment, I saw a flash of guilt in her eyes. but it was gone almost as quickly. She rose from the table, her face unreadable. If you can't accept it, then maybe you don't know me as well as you think you do. And with that, she walked out of the room, leaving me alone in the dim light of the kitchen, her words echoing in the silence. The following days were tense, a cold silence filling the spaces where our conversations used to be. I knew her shoot with Alex was approaching, and the thought of it kept me awake at night, haunted by images I couldn't banish from my mind. She moved through the house as if I weren't there, her focus entirely on the project, on this new life that didn't seem to include me anymore. One night, unable to bear the silence, I tried to bridge the gap once more. I found her in the living room, flipping through a magazine, her expression distant. "Emily," I began, sitting down across from her. "I know we've been at odds over this, but I need you to understand where I'm coming from. This isn't just about the project. It's about us." She looked up, her face guarded, and I could tell she was bracing for another argument. "It's just I don't know where you and I fit in anymore," I continued, struggling to put my feelings into words. "I want to support you, but every time I try, it feels like you're slipping further away." Emily's expression softened, and for a moment, the old warmth was there, a flicker of the connection we'd shared. But it faded quickly, replaced by the same guarded look she'd worn since the project began. "I'm not slipping away," she said quietly. "I'm just rediscovering myself, and Alex is helping me see that. He's showing me things about myself I'd forgotten." I swallowed, feeling the bitterness rise. "And what about me? Am I supposed to just wait here, watching while you find yourself with someone else?" Her face tightened. "It's not about him. It's about me." She stood up, her expression firm, and walked out of the room without another word. The day of the shoot came, and I felt a mixture of anger, sadness, and a helplessness that I couldn't shake. She left early, her face set with a determination that I knew I couldn't break. The house felt empty after she'd gone, a hollow reminder of everything we'd lost. The hours passed in slow agony, each minute stretching longer than the last. Unable to bear the silence, I found myself getting into the car, my body moving on instinct, driving to Alex's studio. When I arrived, I parked down the street, feeling like a stranger about to trespass on something forbidden. I made my way toward the building, my heart pounding, every step filled with the dread of what I might find. I stood outside the studio window, looking in, the soft lighting casting shadows across the room. There, under the glow of the lights, was Emily. She was seated, her bare skin wrapped in a sheet that draped over her shoulder, her expression serene, vulnerable. Alex was behind the camera, his gaze focused entirely on her, capturing her in a way that felt intimate, too intimate. Their eyes met, a look passing between them that made my stomach churn. I watched as she relaxed, the way she softened under his gaze, her eyes shining with an openness I hadn't seen in years. It was as if he were reaching a part of her that I'd lost, a part she was no longer willing to share with me. The realization hit me like a cold wave. This wasn't just art. This was her stepping into a new world, a world she was choosing over the life we'd built together. It was a betrayal, not just of our marriage, but of everything I thought we still shared. I turned away, the pain too much to bear, and walked back to the car, each step feeling like a nail in the coffin of our relationship. I drove home, the silence of the empty house greeting me as I entered. I sat down, numb, the weight of everything pressing down, and for the first time, I felt like I was truly alone. The silence at home was unbearable after that day. Emily returned late that night, her face glowing with a quiet contentment that only deepened my sense of betrayal. She barely looked at me as she slipped into bed, her back turned, lost in a world I could no longer access. I lay there, my mind racing, every instinct screaming that the gap between us was no longer just emotional. It was physical. Days passed, each one feeling like a test of my restraint, my patience unraveling with each passing hour. I watched her leave each morning, her excitement apparent, a visible lightness in her step that used to be reserved for the life we shared. I became a spectator in my own marriage, waiting, watching, my mind burdened with questions I could no longer suppress. The doubt finally became too much. That evening, as she sat in the living room, her eyes fixed on her phone, I felt the last of my resolve break. "Emily," I said, barely recognizing the sound of my own voice. "We need to talk, and I need you to be honest with me." She looked up, her face wary, as if she already knew where this was headed. "About what?" "About Alex," I replied, my voice edged with desperation. Are you, and he?" She cut me off, her tone defensive. "What are you trying to say?" I swallowed, feeling my heart pound. "Are you and he more than just collaborators?" Her face shifted, a flicker of something crossing her features before she masked it. "I can't believe you'd ask that," she replied, her voice cold. "You think I'd throw away everything we've built together? Over a project?" "It's not just a project anymore, Emily," I shot back, the anger finally breaking through. "It's changed you. We used to share everything, but now there are whole parts of your life I'm shut out of. You're keeping me at arm's length, and I need to know why." She shook her head, standing up, her arms crossed. "This is about you not trusting me. This is your problem, not mine." But her words didn't convince me, and I felt my patience snap. "Then why don't you show me your messages with him?" Emily froze, her eyes narrowing. "What? If there's nothing going on, let me see your messages with him. Prove to me that I'm wrong," I demanded, my heart hammering. For a moment, she just stared at me, her expression unreadable. But instead of reaching for her phone, she shook her head. "I don't need to prove anything to you. This isn't about Alex. This is about us. You don't believe in me or trust me, and that's the real issue here." With that, she turned and walked toward the bedroom, leaving me standing in the silence, my suspicions confirmed by her refusal. I watched her go, the final threads of my trust unraveling, leaving me hollow and adrift. I knew I couldn't go on like this. The constant doubt was destroying me from the inside, and I needed to know the truth. The next day, I made a decision I'd never thought I'd have to make. I would follow her to the studio, confront her with whatever I found, even if it meant seeing what I most feared. That evening, I watched from my car as she entered the studio, her movements calm, without hesitation. The lights in the building flickered on, illuminating the room in a soft glow, and I could make out their figures through the large windows. Emily seated in a familiar pose, Alex adjusting his camera. But then, as I looked closer, I saw it. The way his hand lingered on her shoulder, the soft, shared smile that passed between them, the way she leaned toward him, her face lit with something I could only describe as adoration. I felt my stomach twist, the sight confirming what I'd tried so desperately to ignore. This wasn't just art. This was intimacy, a closeness they shared that was meant for us, for our marriage. I felt a surge of anger rise in me, a fury so intense it took all my control not to barge in and confront them both. Instead, I pulled out my phone and snapped a photo, a moment I knew would haunt me, but one I needed to see the truth. I watched a little longer, until the pain became too much, and I drove away, my mind reeling, my heart shattered. Back home, I waited in silence, replaying the image over and over, each detail cementing the truth I hadn't wanted to face. Emily came home late, slipping inside quietly, as if her absence had gone unnoticed. I waited until she reached the bedroom before following her in. My face set, my resolve hardened by the pain. "We need to talk now," I said, my voice low, laced with anger. She looked up startled, her face pale. "It's late. Can't we do this tomorrow?" "No, we're doing this now," I replied, holding up my phone, the photo visible on the screen. "What is this, Emily? What's going on between you and Alex?" Her face drained of color, and she took a step back, her gaze dropping to the floor. She didn't deny it. She didn't even try to explain. She just stood there, a mixture of guilt and sadness written on her face. "Is this what it's come to?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Sneaking around, lying, leaving me alone night after night while you're with him?" She looked up, her eyes filled with tears, but she still said nothing, her silence more painful than any words could have been. "I need to hear it, Emily. I need to hear the truth." I demanded, my voice shaking. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't expect to feel this way. The confession hit me like a blow, and I felt my legs weaken. So it's true? I whispered, my mind spinning. You've been with him. She nodded, her face crumbling as she reached out to me. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to hurt you. I was just lost, and he made me feel seen again. I pulled away from her touch, a wave of disgust and heartbreak washing over me. And what about us? What about everything we've built together? Was that not enough for you? She covered her face, her shoulders shaking as she tried to stifle her sobs. I don't know what happened. I never meant to hurt you. I turned away, the anger and pain blurring my vision. I can't do this, Emily. I can't keep pretending that this is just about art. You broke us, and I don't know if we'll ever be able to fix it. She didn't respond, her silence saying everything I needed to hear. I walked out of the bedroom, leaving her alone, the echoes of our life together fading behind me. I knew that whatever had once held us together was gone, shattered by the choices she'd made. And as I stepped into the cold silence of the empty house, I felt the weight of the betrayal settle over me, final and unbreakable. The days following her confession blurred into a fog of anger, sorrow, and exhaustion. I was numb, operating on autopilot, each day bleeding into the next. Emily tried reaching out to me, but her apologies felt hollow, empty words that did nothing to mend the damage. Each attempt to talk only reopened the wound, reminding me of the betrayal she had chosen over the life we had built together. Our conversations became strained, filled with a bitter silence neither of us dared to break. She tried to offer explanations, moments where she felt neglected, times she needed a creative outlet. But each excuse only deepened my resentment. It was as if she expected me to understand, to forgive, as if her reasons could somehow justify the night she spent with Alex, the intimacy they had shared. One night, after another failed attempt at reconciliation, I found myself alone in the dark, unable to sleep. I stared at the ceiling, my mind replaying every memory of our life together, each moment colored by the knowledge of her betrayal. It was too much. I needed answers, something to make sense of the mess she had left in the wake of her choices. Driven by desperation, I unlocked her phone. I knew it was wrong, an invasion of her privacy, but trust had long since crumbled. I scrolled through her messages, my stomach twisting with every notification from Alex that filled her screen. Most were innocuous, but then I found them, the messages that confirmed everything I had feared. Flirtatious texts, late-night exchanges, words laced with affection that should have been meant for me. Each message was a knife twisting in the wound, a reminder of the man she had led into our marriage. One message, in particular, stood out, his words still etched in my memory. Last night was incredible. I can't wait to see you again. She had responded with an equally heartfelt reply, her words betraying a warmth she hadn't shown me in months. A mixture of fury and heartbreak surged through me, and I felt the tears I had been holding back finally spill over. I didn't know who I was crying for, myself, for losing her, or the life we'd had that was now gone. I put the phone down, disgusted, feeling as if I'd lost not only her, but also a part of myself. The next morning, I was waiting for her when she came into the kitchen. Her face was drawn, shadows beneath her eyes, and for the first time, I saw the toll it was taking on her too. But sympathy felt impossible. All I could feel was the betrayal, the anger that wouldn't let me rest. Were you ever going to tell me? I asked, my voice barely controlled, thick with hurt. She froze, realizing what I meant. Her face crumpled, and for a moment, she looked as broken as I felt. I didn't know how. Didn't know how? I repeated, my voice rising. You had plenty of chances, Emily. All those nights you came home late. All those mornings you looked at me and said nothing. You could have told me the truth. She looked down, her hands trembling. I thought I could stop it. I thought it would end. I laughed bitterly. So that's supposed to make this easier? That you thought it would end? Tears streamed down her face, but I felt nothing but a cold, hard anger. I don't know what you want me to say, she whispered, her voice breaking. I can't take it back. I can only tell you how sorry I am. But her apology fell flat, like an echo in an empty room. Sorry doesn't fix this, I replied, each word a reminder of the distance that had grown between us. Sorry doesn't erase what you did with him. You chose him over us. She broke down, her shoulders shaking as she covered her face, her sobs filling the silence of the kitchen. I wanted to feel something, compassion, maybe even pity, but I was too broken, too angry to reach out. Without another word, I turned and left the room, leaving her to her tears. It felt like the only choice I had left, the only way to survive what she had done. Over the next few days, I withdrew completely, unable to stand being near her. I took refuge at work, arriving early, staying late, drowning myself in tasks that kept me distracted. I found solace in the routine, a way to numb the pain. But every time I returned home, the sight of her reopened the wounds, raw and unhealed. Finally, the exhaustion became too much. I needed an escape, a plan to move forward without her in my life. That night, as I lay in bed, the idea formed slowly, an answer to the anger and resentment that had been festering inside me since her betrayal. I would take back control. I would take something from them both, something that would leave a mark they couldn't ignore. They had used their relationship to hurt me, and I would use it to expose them for what they truly were. The next day, I arranged a meeting with Alex, pretending to be interested in patching things up. I feigned forgiveness, hiding my contempt behind a polite smile, complimenting his work and subtly suggesting that he create a new, ambitious project centered around Emily. We could call it something like The Complexity of Love. I proposed, my tone casual. A series of portraits exploring love's darker sides. Vulnerability, honesty, maybe even guilt. Emily would be the perfect subject. He looked at me, intrigued, his expression shifting as he considered my words. That could work, he replied, his excitement barely contained. It's bold, raw. I think it could be incredible. I nodded, suppressing a bitter smile. And who better to capture it than you? Alex's eyes lit up, oblivious to the malice hidden behind my plan. We set up the project, each session designed to capture their emotions, their secrets, in a way they thought would remain hidden from the world. But what they didn't know was that I intended to show these images to everyone. Emily was cautious at first, but Alex convinced her, coaxing her into the project with promises of art, of healing. And as I watched them fall further into the lie, posing for each raw, vulnerable shot, I felt the weight begin to lift, a cold satisfaction replacing the pain. When the night of the gallery show finally arrived, I felt a sense of closure, a calmness I hadn't felt in months. The room was filled with family, friends, patrons, all there to see the new project Alex had created, unaware of the dark truth beneath the art. When it was time, I took the stage, standing in front of the crowd, the images on display. I began with a short speech, talking about the beauty of honesty, the necessity of truth, and the consequences of betrayal. And then, one by one, the portraits appeared on the screen. Images of Emily and Alex together, each one capturing their affair with brutal clarity. The crowd murmured, shocked, their whispers growing louder as the truth became undeniable. Emily and Alex stood in the back, frozen, their faces pale, horror written in their expressions. I caught Emily's gaze as the last image appeared, the final stroke of betrayal exposed for all to see. She looked at me, pleading silently, but I held her gaze, unflinching, letting her see the strength she had underestimated. When I finished, the room was silent, a stunned hush hanging in the air. I stepped down from the stage, walking past Emily and Alex, leaving them to face the fallout of their choices. The satisfaction was cold, but it was enough, a final act of closure for the pain they had inflicted. Outside, I breathed in the night air, feeling free for the first time since it all began. I had lost her, yes, but I had reclaimed myself, and that was enough. In the end, their betrayal was their burden to bear, and I walked away, leaving them to live with the masterpiece of their own making. In the days that followed the gallery show, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The anger that had driven me for so long was finally quiet, leaving behind an emptiness I hadn't expected. Emily and Alex had been exposed, and now the world knew the truth. But as I moved through the routines of daily life, I realized that my journey wasn't over. There was still a part of me that felt incomplete, that craved a resolution deeper than public humiliation. Emily had left our home after the show, retreating to stay with a friend. I hadn't seen or spoken to her since that night. She'd left a few messages, short texts trying to explain herself, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. She was a stranger to me now, a ghost haunting the empty spaces of our life. Alex, too, had vanished from the art scene, his once promising reputation tainted by the scandal I had laid bare. They had both lost something that night, but it felt strangely hollow to me now, as if my own victory had somehow turned to ash. One evening, a week after the show, Emily showed up at the door, her face worn and pale. She looked as though she hadn't slept in days, her eyes rimmed with dark circles that made her appear older, fragile. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated, the weight of our shared past holding me in place, but eventually I nodded, stepping aside to let her in. We sat across from each other in the living room, the silence stretching between us like a wound that had yet to heal. She looked around, her gaze settling on the photos that lined the walls. Photos from better days, reminders of a love that had once been real. "I don't know where to start," she began, her voice trembling. "I know I hurt you, more than I can ever make right. And I know it's too late for apologies." I stayed silent, watching her struggle to find the words. Everything we had together, it was real, but somewhere along the way, I lost myself. I thought this project, working with Alex, it was supposed to be a way to find myself again. But I didn't realize how much of you I'd lose in the process. Her voice broke, and she covered her mouth, holding back a sob. A part of me wanted to reach out, to offer her comfort. But the wounds were too fresh, the betrayal too deep. "You made your choices, Emily," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "You chose him. You chose to leave me behind." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to know that I never stopped loving you. Even when I was lost, even when I was with him, a part of me always belonged to you." The words hung in the air, and I felt a pang of sadness, a longing for the life we'd had, but it was tempered by the knowledge of all that had been broken. "Maybe that's true," I said, my voice soft. "But love isn't enough when trust is gone." We sat in silence, both of us lost in the memories of a life that was no longer ours. Finally, she stood, wiping her eyes as she gave me one last, sorrowful look. "Goodbye," she whispered, her voice carrying the weight of finality, and then she turned and walked out, leaving me alone in the quiet. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into work, trying to rebuild a life without her. The house felt emptier than ever, each room a reminder of what had been lost. But gradually, I began to find a new rhythm, a sense of peace in the solitude. One afternoon, as I was cleaning out the attic, I came across a box of old photos, mementos from our early years together. As I sifted through them, I felt a mixture of sadness and nostalgia, the memories of who we had once been together mingling with the reality of who we had become. It was a reminder of how fragile love could be, how easily it could slip away if not carefully tended. I held one photo in particular, a candid shot of Emily laughing, her face filled with joy, her eyes bright with life. I had taken it on a whim, during one of our early trips together, before life had dulled that light in her eyes. I found myself smiling, despite the pain, grateful for the love we had shared, even if it hadn't lasted. In that moment, I realized that it was time to let go, truly let go, to release the bitterness and resentment that had weighed me down. I couldn't change the past, but I could choose to move forward, to rebuild my life on my own terms. A few months later, I heard through mutual friends that Emily had moved to another city, seeking a fresh start. Alex had all but disappeared from the art world, his reputation tarnished beyond repair. The scandal of our gallery show had left a lasting mark, and he had become a cautionary tale in artistic circles, a man who had lost everything for a moment of passion. As for me, I found myself slowly healing, finding solace in the small moments of everyday life. I began to pursue my own creative projects, reconnecting with the passions I had set aside for so long. I explored new places, met new people, and gradually, I felt the weight of the past lifting, replaced by a quiet hope for the future. One evening, I found myself standing by the shore, watching the sun set over the water, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace, a sense that I was exactly where I was meant to be. As I watched the waves roll in, I thought about the journey that had brought me here, the love, the betrayal, the pain, and I felt a strange gratitude for it all. It had broken me, yes, but it had also given me the strength to rebuild, to find myself in the ruins of what had once been. And as the last light of day faded into the horizon, I felt a quiet resolve settle within me. I was free, finally free, to live my life on my own terms, unburdened by the past, ready to embrace whatever the future might hold. Months had passed since that chapter of my life closed, since Emily and Alex had exited my world and left me to rebuild. Life had a way of stitching up wounds over time, leaving only scars that reminded me of lessons learned. But one day, something unexpected arrived in the mail, a reminder that stirred up memories I thought I'd left behind. It was a thick envelope from a prominent art magazine, one I hadn't subscribed to in years. Curious, I opened it to find a letter inviting me to a new exhibition featuring local artists. And in the list of contributors, I saw a familiar name, Alex Grafton. My stomach twisted, my mind reeling with a mixture of resentment and curiosity. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to stay as far from him as possible, but another part, a deeper, darker part, needed to see what he had done with his life after everything he'd put me through. The night of the exhibit, I arrived early, slipping into the gallery with an anonymity that felt oddly comforting. It was quiet, the soft murmur of patrons filling the space as I wandered through the exhibits, taking in the art, each piece telling its own story of loss, of growth, of transformation. And then I found Alex's section. To my surprise, the walls were filled with haunting images, all deeply familiar. His Complexity of Love series was displayed in full, portraits capturing moments of despair, vulnerability, even betrayal. It was clear he'd tried to use the pain he'd caused as inspiration, using the very fallout of his actions to shape his work. But there was something missing, a hollowness that lingered in each frame, as though he was reaching for an authenticity he couldn't grasp. As I looked closer, I realized he hadn't changed at all. He was still chasing a version of himself that he thought others wanted to see, still using others' lives, others' heartbreak as his muse. My mind raced with the memories of that fateful night at his original gallery show, the images I'd so carefully curated to expose the truth of his relationship with Emily. I felt the familiar churn of anger and regret, a reminder of the time I'd lost to his betrayal. I was about to walk away when I felt a presence beside me. I turned to find Alex himself, standing there with a guarded expression. He looked different, aged, tired, as though he carried the weight of what he'd lost on his shoulders. But there was still a hint of that old arrogance in his posture, the same smugness that had once taunted me from across a room. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said, his tone measured, a hint of surprise in his voice. I shrugged, keeping my gaze fixed on his work. "I didn't expect to be here either," I replied, the words cold. "But I guess I was curious to see what you'd made of your masterpiece." A shadow crossed his face, his jaw tightening. "I know what you must think of me," he began, his voice low. "But what happened, what I did, it wasn't just some game. I loved her." I laughed, the sound bitter. "Loved her? Is that what you call it? Using her and tearing apart the life we built together? I thought you were just creating art, Alex. Or was that just a convenient excuse?" He sighed, rubbing his temples, as if trying to find words that could bridge the chasm between us. "I didn't plan any of this, and I'm not proud of how it turned out. But she was lost, just like I was. We were both trying to find something real, something honest." "And did you?" I asked, my tone sharp, watching his reaction closely. He hesitated, his gaze drifting to his own work. In the end, no, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought I'd find something in her, a way to escape my own emptiness. But all I did was destroy 2 lives. Maybe 3. I nodded, the confirmation strangely satisfying. A reminder that the emptiness he felt now was his own doing. Funny, isn't it? I said, unable to hide the edge in my voice. You took everything from me, and yet, you're the one left trying to fill the void. Alex looked away, a flash of shame crossing his face. He didn't reply, and I realized there was nothing more I needed from him, no words that would give me closure. I'd already taken back control, already moved on, and standing there, watching him in the shadow of his own mistakes, I finally felt free. As I left the gallery, I realized that, for the first time, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The weight of his betrayal, of everything he had taken from me, had lifted. I'd seen the hollow shell of the man who had once caused me so much pain, and I no longer felt anger or even pity, only relief. Walking through the city, the cool night air filling my lungs, I felt the kind of clarity I hadn't known since before Emily's affair. My life was no longer defined by their choices, by their betrayals. It was mine, fully and completely, to shape as I wished. I returned home that night and put the final remnants of that chapter behind me. I boxed up the last photos of Emily, the few keepsakes from our life together that I hadn't yet let go of, and placed them in the attic. They were memories now, pieces of a life that had ended, but they no longer held power over me. In the weeks that followed, I found myself embracing my work with a renewed passion, exploring new ideas, capturing moments of beauty in the everyday. And as I did, I felt the wounds begin to heal, replaced by a quiet strength, a resilience born from the knowledge that I had survived, that I had come out stronger on the other side. Months later, I attended a small gallery show of my own, showcasing my latest work, a series that captured the beauty of resilience, of healing, of finding oneself again after loss. Friends and strangers alike wandered through the gallery, their faces lighting up as they connected with the images, the stories I had woven into each piece. Toward the end of the evening, as the last guest trickled out, a woman approached me. She was thoughtful, kind-eyed, her face lit with an easy smile that felt like sunlight breaking through a cloud. "I just wanted to say how much your work means to me," she said, her voice warm. "It's so raw, so real. It's like you can feel the strength in each image." I smiled, feeling a quiet pride. "Thank you," I replied. "That's exactly what I was hoping to capture." We talked for a while, sharing stories of loss, of resilience, of finding hope in unexpected places. There was an ease between us, a sense of understanding that felt comforting, grounding. And as we parted ways that night, I felt a spark of something new, a glimmer of hope for the future. Standing outside the gallery, I looked up at the night sky, filled with stars. For the first time in years, I felt whole, my heart no longer burdened by the weight of betrayal. I was free, unburdened, ready to embrace whatever life had in store. As I walked home, the memories of my past faded, replaced by a new resolve, a promise to myself that I would never let anyone else define my happiness, my worth, or my future. I was done with betrayal, with pain. I was ready to live fully, to love freely, to begin again. And in that moment, I knew I was finally at peace. The weeks following my own gallery show brought a new rhythm to my life, one that felt fresh, promising, and free of the shadows that had once haunted me. There was a kind of liberation in owning my story, in turning my pain into something that could resonate with others, that might even inspire healing. It was as if I had finally stepped out of the confines of my past, leaving the betrayal behind as I began to build a future shaped by my own choices. Yet one final act remained, an epilogue to the story of Alex, Emily, and the betrayal that had nearly torn me apart. I was invited to another exhibit a few months later, this time by a former colleague who was hosting a panel on the role of authenticity in modern art. The topic intrigued me, given the years I had spent in Emily's shadow, feeling as if my own art had been overshadowed by Alex's so-called brilliance. I accepted the invitation, deciding it was time to revisit the world that had once been filled with both inspiration and pain. The exhibit was packed, the buzz of conversation echoing off the gallery walls as I mingled with familiar faces, many of whom had attended Alex's now infamous show months earlier. People approached me, some offering compliments on my recent work, others just catching up. And though I'd long since closed that chapter, I couldn't help but notice the occasional glance toward Alex, who was standing in a corner, isolated and withdrawn, a stark contrast to his usual self-assured demeanor. It seemed the scandal had left a lasting mark on his career. Few spoke to him, and those who did kept their interactions brief. His work had taken a hit. Many patrons had pulled their support, distancing themselves from the mess he had made of his reputation. But that night, I realized that even with his career faltering, he still didn't understand the lesson he'd needed to learn. During the panel discussion, Alex was asked to speak about his views on authenticity. As he took the microphone, a hush fell over the audience, a palpable curiosity tinged with judgment. He glanced around the room, his gaze pausing on me for a fleeting moment before he spoke. "Art," he began, his voice subdued but still carrying an edge of arrogance, "is about truth. It's about breaking boundaries, reaching into the deepest parts of ourselves and bearing it for the world to see. Sometimes that requires taking risks, pushing people, even ourselves, into uncomfortable places." I could feel my jaw tighten as he continued, each word feeling like a half-truth designed to justify his actions. There was no remorse in his voice, only a thinly veiled attempt to frame his choices as bravery, his betrayals as some form of twisted honesty. When he finished, the audience was silent, and for a moment, I felt the familiar anger rising in me. But this time, I didn't let it control me. Instead, I raised my hand, catching his eye as I asked the question that had been weighing on my mind since the night he had shattered my life. "Alex, do you believe there's a difference between honesty and exploitation? Between revealing truth and using people as pawns in your own story?" The room went silent, all eyes shifting between us. He hesitated, visibly thrown by the question, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something in his expression. Doubt, perhaps, or shame. "Art is complicated," he finally replied, his voice uncertain. "Sometimes, to capture the truth, you have to step into difficult territory." I nodded, holding his gaze. "Maybe, but there's a fine line between revealing truth and betraying those who trusted you. And if you cross that line, the truth you create becomes tainted, hollow." A murmur spread through the room, a quiet acknowledgement from those who knew the story, who had seen the fallout of Alex's choices. He looked away, his face pale, as if my words had finally struck a chord. It was a small victory, but a necessary one. A reminder to him and everyone else that art could be powerful without betrayal, that truth didn't have to come at the expense of others' pain. After the panel, as people drifted away, I stepped outside, breathing in the cool night air. The tension I'd felt moments before melted away, replaced by a sense of relief, as though I'd finally released the last hold Alex and Emily had on my life. As I walked along the sidewalk, a familiar voice called out to me. I turned to find the woman I'd met at my own gallery show, the one who had praised the honesty in my work, whose kind eyes had stayed with me even after that night. She approached with a warm smile, her gaze filled with that same easy understanding I'd felt in our first conversation. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, her voice soft. "Not at all," I replied, feeling a surge of gratitude for the unexpected companionship. We walked in comfortable silence for a while, both of us taking in the quiet of the night, the rhythm of our steps matching as we wandered through the city streets. She finally broke the silence, her tone thoughtful. "I saw the way you spoke tonight. There was something in your words, a strength I hadn't seen before." I glanced at her, surprised by the observation. "It's funny," I said, my voice low. "For a long time, I thought strength meant holding on, fighting for things even when they were broken. But I've learned that sometimes strength means letting go, walking away even when it's hard." She nodded, a gentle smile curving her lips. "And you've done that beautifully." We stopped at a small coffee shop, taking a seat by the window as we talked late into the night, sharing stories of resilience, of new beginnings, of the beauty found in the aftermath of pain. With each passing moment, I felt the last remnants of my past slipping away, replaced by a quiet hope for the future. In the months that followed, our friendship deepened, blossoming into something neither of us had anticipated. There was an ease between us, a shared understanding that had grown out of the shadows of our own experiences, and gradually, that friendship turned into something more, a love built on trust, on honesty, on a mutual respect that felt like a breath of fresh air. Together, we explored new places, shared new experiences, filling our lives with memories that were entirely our own, untainted by the past. She became my muse, not in the way Alex had viewed Emily as a subject to exploit, but as an equal partner, someone who inspired me simply by being herself. One evening, as we watched the sunset from the hill overlooking the city, I felt the weight of the past lift completely, replaced by a quiet joy I hadn't thought I'd feel again. She looked at me, her face lit by the soft glow of the fading light, and took my hand, her touch grounding me, reminding me that I had finally found my way home. I never thought I'd feel this way again, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. She smiled, her gaze steady. Neither did I. But sometimes, the best things come when you least expect them. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I knew that my journey had come full circle. The pain, the betrayal, the anger, it had all been part of a story that had led me here, to this moment, to this life I was now free to live on my own terms. And as I held her hand, feeling the warmth of her love, I understood that I was no longer defined by the scars of my past. I had found something real, something true, something that belonged entirely to me. And for the first time in a long time, I was finally at peace, ready to embrace the beautiful, unexpected future that lay ahead.